Shocking developments in General Hospital. Danny and Rocco's dangerous mission leads to deadly consequences. Welcome back to ABC General Hospital Spoilers channel. Today we will learn about the most explosive storyline yet to unfold in Port Charles. A tale of teenage courage turned tragic that will forever change the lives of Danny Morgan, Rocco Falconeri, and Scout Quartermain. The growing bond between Danny and Rocco. In recent weeks, viewers have witnessed an incredible transformation in the relationship between Danny Morgan and Rocco Falconeri. These two stepbrothers, who once struggled to find common ground, have developed an unbreakable bond forged through shared experiences at the Metro Court pool and their mutual understanding of complex family dynamics. Their friendship has evolved from simple camaraderie to something much deeper, a protective alliance that would ultimately lead to devastating consequences. Danny, still reeling from the loss of his mother Sam McCall, has found solace in his conversations with Rocco during their poolside chats. Both boys understand what it means to live in complicated family situations, and this shared understanding has created a foundation of trust between them that goes beyond typical teenage friendships. Rocco, dealing with his own identity crisis after learning about his biological connections to Britt Westburn, has found in Danny not just a stepbrother, but a true confidant. Scout's desperate situation. The catalyst for the tragic events that would unfold lies in the deteriorating situation surrounding Scout Quartermain. Drew Kane's increasingly erratic behavior and his determination to relocate Scout to Washington, D.C., has created a powder keg of family tension. Scout, who cherishes her time with her brothers Danny and Rocco, has been systematically isolated from her Port Charles family by her father's manipulative tactics. The young girl's emotional state has become increasingly fragile as she watches her world shrink around her. Drew's broken promises to allow family visits, his dismissive attitude toward Scout's emotional needs, and his aggressive stance against anyone who tries to help her have left Scout feeling trapped and desperate. The camping incident, where Scout essentially orchestrated her own rescue by asking Danny to bring her to the Quartermain mansion, was a clear cry for help from a child who felt abandoned by the one parent she has left. The plan takes shape. During one of their heart-to-heart conversations by the pool, Danny confided in Rocco about his deep concern for Scout's well-being. The pain in Danny's voice was evident as he described how Drew's insistence on moving Scout to Washington was causing his little sister immense distress. Danny expressed his frustration at feeling powerless to help Scout, especially given Drew's increasingly hostile attitude toward the Morgan family and his efforts to prevent any contact between Scout and her brothers. Rocco, whose own experiences with family complications had taught him to think strategically, began formulating a plan. He understood that direct confrontation with Drew would be futile, and that traditional channels of communication had been systematically shut down by Drew's authoritarian approach to parenting. The plan that emerged was bold, dangerous, and driven by teenage desperation to protect someone they loved. Rocco proposed that they conduct a covert operation to reach Scout directly, breaking into Drew's residence to have a face-to-face conversation with her about the Washington, D.C. relocation. The plan was risky, but both boys felt that Scout deserved to have her voice heard and her feelings acknowledged. Danny, despite his reservations about the legality of their intended actions, agreed to participate because his love for Scout outweighed his concerns about potential consequences. The break-in and shocking discovery. Undercover of Darkness. Danny and Rocco executed their plan with the determination of two teenagers who believed they were fighting for justice. They managed to gain entry to Drew's residence, their hearts pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and fear. What they expected to find was Scout alone, perhaps doing homework or preparing for bed. What they actually discovered would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As they quietly made their way through the house, the sound of raised voices drew them toward Drew's study. Through the partially open door, they witnessed a scene that shattered their understanding of the man they thought they knew. Drew and Scout were engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument about the impending move to Washington, D.C. Scout's voice, though young and trembling, carried a strength that surprised both boys as she articulated her reasons for not wanting to leave Port Charles. The argument escalated rapidly, with Drew's frustration mounting as Scout continued to resist his plans. The boys watched in horror as Drew's demeanor shifted from paternal authority to something much darker and more threatening. Scout's continued defiance seemed to trigger something primal in Drew, and his response was swift and shocking. The moment everything changed, What happened next would be seared into the memories of everyone present. Drew, his face contorted with rage, raised his hand and struck Scout across the face with a force that sent the young girl stumbling backward. The sound of the slap echoed through the room like a gunshot, followed by Scout's cry of pain and shock. The man who was supposed to protect her, nurture her, and guide her through life had just become her attacker. Danny and Rocco, who had been frozen in horrified silence during the argument, were galvanized into action by this act of violence. Their protective instincts overrode any concern for their own safety as they burst through the door and positioned themselves between Drew and Scout. The confrontation that followed was chaotic and terrifying, with emotions running at fever pitch and rational thought abandoned in favor of primal protective responses. Drew's reaction to the sudden appearance of the two boys was immediate and explosive. His anger, already heightened by his confrontation with Scout, now had new targets. The fact that his home had been violated, that his private moment of violence had been witnessed, and that these teenagers dared to challenge his authority created a perfect storm of rage that would have devastating consequences. The escalation to violence. Drew's fury at discovering Danny and Rocco in his home was compounded by his existing animosity toward Danny. The teenager represented everything Drew resented about the Morgan family's influence over Scout, and the sight of him in his home triggered a response that was both immediate and vicious. Without warning or consideration for the consequences, Drew lashed out at Danny with the same violence he had just shown Scout. The blow sent Danny reeling, but it also awakened something fierce within the teenager. Danny had witnessed Drew's violence against Scout, had himself become a victim of that same violence, and now found himself in a situation where fight-or-flight responses took over. The months of frustration, the grief over his mother's death, the helplessness he felt watching Scout suffer, all of these emotions crystallized into a moment of action that would change everything. What happened next occurred in the space of heartbeats, but would have consequences that lasted forever. Danny, acting on instinct and desperation, reached for what he believed might be his only means of protecting himself and Scout from further violence. The gun he found and raised was not part of any premeditated plan. It was the desperate action of a teenager who had been pushed beyond his breaking point. The fatal shot. The gunshot that rang out through Drew's home was the sound of childhood innocence ending and adult consequences beginning. Danny's finger on the trigger was guided not by malice or premeditation, but by fear, desperation, and the primal need to protect those he loved. The bullet found its mark with devastating accuracy, and Drew Kane, congressman, father, and source of so much recent turmoil, collapsed to the floor, his life ending in an instant. The silence that followed was deafening. 3 teenagers stood in shock, their minds struggling to process what had just occurred. Scout, still reeling from her father's violence, now faced the additional trauma of witnessing his death. Rocco, who had helped plan this mission to save Scout, found himself complicit in an outcome he never could have imagined. And Danny, the boy who had pulled the trigger, faced the reality that his desire to protect his sister had led him to take a life. The aftermath and panic. In the moments following the shooting, panic set in with full force. The 3 children found themselves in a situation for which no amount of life experience could have prepared them. Scout, despite the violence her father had just inflicted upon her, was traumatized by witnessing his death. The complex emotions of relief, grief, shock, and fear created a psychological maelstrom that left her unable to process what had happened. Rocco, whose strategic thinking had gotten them into this situation, found his mental faculties overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had occurred. The plan to help Scout had succeeded in removing the immediate threat to her well-being, but had created consequences that were far worse than anything they had anticipated. The weight of being an accessory to this tragic outcome pressed down on him with crushing force. Danny faced the most complex emotional landscape of all. He had just killed a man, not in cold blood or with premeditation, but in a moment of desperate self-defense and protection of his sister. The gun in his hands felt impossibly heavy, not just physically, but symbolically, representing the end of his childhood and the beginning of a future filled with legal consequences and moral questions. The decision to confess. As the initial shock began to fade, the 3 teenagers faced a choice that would define the rest of their lives. They could attempt to cover up what had happened, perhaps claim that Drew had been killed by an intruder, or they could face the truth and accept the consequences of their actions. The decision they made speaks to the fundamental character of these young people and the values instilled in them by their families. Danny, despite his youth and the terror he was feeling, made the decision to call the police. This choice was driven not by legal advice or adult guidance, but by an innate understanding of right and wrong that had been nurtured by his mother Sam, and reinforced by his father Jason's example. Even knowing that confessing would likely result in his arrest and imprisonment for murder, Danny chose honesty over self-preservation. The phone call to 911 was perhaps the most difficult thing Danny had ever done. His voice shaking, he reported the shooting and requested immediate assistance. In that moment, he transformed from a teenager acting on impulse to a young man accepting responsibility for his actions. The consequences would be severe, but his conscience demanded nothing less than complete honesty about what had transpired. The broader impact on Port Charles, the death of Drew Kane and the circumstances surrounding it, will send shockwaves throughout Port Charles that extend far beyond the immediate families involved. Drew, despite his recent controversial actions, was a prominent figure in the community, a congressman with political aspiration and connections throughout the power structure of the fictional town. The legal implications alone will be staggering. Danny faces potential charges of manslaughter or second-degree murder. Despite the circumstances that led to the shooting, Rocco could face charges as an accessory, and both boys will need to navigate the complex legal system with the weight of adult consequences bearing down on their teenage shoulders. The fact that they broke into Drew's home initially will complicate any self-defense arguments their attorneys might attempt to make. For the Quartermain family, Drew's death creates a power vacuum and raises immediate questions about Scout's custody. With Drew gone, the battle over Scout's future will likely intensify, with Alexis Davis, Monica Quartermain, and other family members positioning themselves to provide the stability and love that Scout desperately needs. The irony is not lost that the very situation Danny and Rocco were trying to resolve, Scout's isolation from her family, may now be resolved, but at a cost that no one could have anticipated. The psychological toll on the children, beyond the legal ramifications. The psychological impact of these events on all three children cannot be overstated. Scout, already traumatized by her father's increasing volatility and violence, now faces the additional burden of having witnessed his death at the hands of her beloved brother. The complex emotions she will experience, relief at being free from Drew's control, guilt over feeling that relief, grief for her father despite his flaws, and trauma from witnessing violence, will require extensive therapeutic intervention. Danny's psychological journey will be equally complex. Having taken a life, even in circumstances that could be considered justifiable, will weigh heavily on a young man who was raised with strong moral principles. The knowledge that his actions, while protective in intent, resulted in death will be something he carries for the rest of his life. The support of his family, particularly Jason Morgan, will be crucial in helping him navigate the emotional aftermath of his actions. Rocco, as the architect of the plan that led to this tragedy, faces his own set of psychological challenges. The guilt of having suggested the break-in, the trauma of witnessing violence and death, and the fear of legal consequences will all take their toll on his emotional well-being. His role as an accessory to these events will require him to confront difficult questions about responsibility, consequences, and the price of good intentions gone wrong. The future of these young lives. As this storyline continues to develop, viewers will witness the long-term consequences of one night's tragic events. Danny's future, once bright with possibilities, now includes the very real possibility of incarceration and a criminal record that will follow him for life. The justice system's treatment of a juvenile who acted in defense of his sister will be closely watched, and the outcome will depend largely on how successfully his legal team can argue the circumstances that led to the shooting. Scout's future, ironically, may be more stable as a result of these tragic events. With Drew no longer able to isolate her from her Port Charles family, she may finally receive the love and support she has been craving. However, the trauma she has experienced will require significant healing, and the knowledge that her freedom came at such a high price will be something she will need to process for years to come. The bond between Danny and Rocco, forged in their shared desire to help Scout and strengthened by their shared trauma, will be tested by the legal proceedings and public scrutiny that follows. Their friendship, which began as a source of support and understanding, will now be defined by this singular, life-changing event. The ripple effects of Drew Kane's death will be felt throughout Port Charles for months and years to come, affecting not just the immediate families involved, but the entire community that must grapple with questions of justice, responsibility, and the price of protecting those we love. This storyline represents one of General Hospital's most complex and emotionally challenging narratives, exploring themes of family loyalty, the consequences of violence, and the way single moments can alter the trajectory of multiple lives forever. Next, we will learn about the explosive possibility that Peter August might pull off a jaw-dropping impersonation of Nathan West in a bid to reclaim his twisted version of love with Maxi Jones. Diving right into the heart of this potential bombshell, imagine the chaos unfolding if Peter August, that master manipulator with a history of deception, decides to don the face of the beloved Nathan West. We've all been on the edge of our seats with the hints surrounding Britt Westburn's enigmatic boss at the Five Poppies resort, a figure described as utterly deranged and willing to cross any line for their dark agenda. This shadowy puppet master has been pulling strings from afar, orchestrating events that scream of obsession and revenge. Could this be Peter's grand re-entrance? After all, his past antics, from faking deaths to framing innocence, make him the perfect candidate for such an unhinged role. Picture him lurking in the shadows, his mind racing with schemes that tie back to his unresolved fixation on Maxi. Adding fuel to this fire, the resort's eerie atmosphere, with its hidden passages and secretive dealings, seems tailor-made for Peter's brand of psychological warfare, where nothing is ever as straightforward as it appears on the surface. But hold on, because the plot thickens with the news of Ryan Pave's much-anticipated return to General Hospital. Fans are buzzing with speculation, and it's not hard to envision a scenario where this comeback initially presents as Nathan West himself, stepping back into Port Charles with an air of mystery. At first glance, it might seem like Nathan is the one issuing sinister commands, his demeanor twisted into something villainous and unrecognizable. Perhaps we'll see him in dimly lit rooms, barking orders that send chills down spines, or manipulating key players like Britt with a cold, calculated precision that echoes Nathan's old charm but laced with malice. Yet, this could all be a clever ruse, a facade designed to mislead everyone. Inventing a fresh layer here. What if Nathan's return involves high-tech gadgets or underground alliances that Peter has exploited? The show has dabbled in outlandish twists before, so introducing elements like advanced holographic projections or even a network of shady informants could heighten the drama, making the eventual unmasking all the more shocking. Shifting gears to the mechanics of this deception, the storyline could veer into wildly imaginative territory, with Peter impersonating Nathan through extreme measures. Envision a plot where Peter acquires a hyper-realistic mask, crafted by black market experts, that perfectly mimics Nathan's features down to the smallest scar from his detective days. Or, taking it a step further, plastic surgery could transform Peter into Nathan's doppelganger, complete with voice modulation tech to nail that signature Westburn family tone. For an even more sci-fi spin, let's invent a clone scenario, where Peter's consciousness is somehow transferred into a replicated body resembling Nathan, perhaps through forbidden experiments tied to the Casadini family's mad science legacy. This kind of narrative derailment is classic General Hospital, promising curveballs like mistaken identities leading to explosive confrontations, or allies turning foes as the truth unravels. We could see subplots involving DNA tests gone wrong, or loyal friends like Dante Falconeri sniffing out inconsistencies in Nathan's behavior, adding layers of suspense that keep viewers hooked week after week. Now, let's connect this to Maxi Jones' unfolding ordeal, which is ramping up the stakes dramatically, with Maxi grappling with a severe medical emergency, perhaps stemming from stress-induced complications or a mysterious toxin linked to the resort's intrigue. Might slip into a vulnerable coma state, isolated in a high-security hospital wing. In a heart-wrenching scene, Nathan could appear at her bedside, gently clasping her hand and whispering reassurances that everything will turn out fine, his eyes gleaming with feigned tenderness. But beneath that comforting exterior lurks Peter, his creepy intentions bubbling just under the surface as he manipulates the moment to worm his way back into her life. To expand on this, imagine added details like Maxi experiencing vivid dreams where Nathan's voice morphs into Peter's, blurring the lines between reality and hallucination, or nurses overhearing suspicious whispers that hint at ulterior motives. This setup not only heightens the emotional turmoil, but also ties into Peter's long-game obsession, where every touch and word is a calculated step toward rekindling their toxic bond. Looking ahead, Peter's endgame appears crystal clear, a desperate quest to win Maxi back and forge a new beginning, no matter the cost. By hijacking Nathan's identity, he could seamlessly integrate into her world, exploiting the nostalgia and grief she's carried since Nathan's tragic death. This move would be diabolically clever, allowing Peter to resurrect a lost love while erasing his own notorious past. We might see extended arcs, where Nathan woos Maxi with gestures reminiscent of their happier times, like surprise picnics in the park or heartfelt letters echoing Nathan's poetic side, all while Peter secretly sabotages rivals like Austin Gatlin Holt. Inventing new elements, perhaps Peter enlists a reluctant accomplice, such as a reformed villain from his past, to provide alibis or cover tracks, adding intrigue and moral dilemmas. This chapter could unfold gradually, especially considering Kirsten Storm's planned extended hiatus from the show, giving the writers time to build tension and perhaps introduce temporary stand-ins or dream sequences to keep Maxi's storyline alive. Tying it all together, Britt Westburn's own miraculous resurrection sets a perfect precedent for such a wild revival. Her return from the presumed dead has already shaken Port Charles, making the idea of Nathan coming back less far-fetched to the residents. However, while Britt's comeback is genuine, fueled by survival instincts and hidden agendas, Nathan's might be far more contrived a smokescreen for Peter's machinations. This contrast could lead to poignant moments where Britt confronts her brother, only to sense something off, perhaps triggering her investigative skills honed from years in the medical field. With no official word yet on Ryan Pave's exact role, the possibilities swirl like a Port Charles storm. But if it's Nathan with a deceptive twist courtesy of Peter, we're in for a roller coaster. General Hospital spoilers tease more shockers and seismic shifts ahead on the ABC soap. So stay tuned as we deliver the latest scoops on Ryan Pave's return and all the drama it unleashes. What do you think? Could this impersonation plot redefine obsession in Port Charles?